The silence was the first thing that hit. It was a physical force, a sudden vacuum created when hundreds of conversations, all fueled by champagne and ambition, died at once. It rolled across the manicured lawns of the Vance estate, smothering the soft classical music and the gentle clinking of crystal. Every eye, from society columnists to tech moguls to Hollywood royalty, was fixed on the grand entrance. A vehicle had arrived, but it wasn't the arrival that had stunned them into silence. It was the car. Not a gaudy Lamborghini or a stately Rolls-Royce, but a machine that was more myth than automobile. A 2024 Mercedes Maybach S680 by Virgil Abloh. One of only 150 in the world. A two-tone masterpiece of obsidian black and sand-colored paint. It looked less like a car and more like a piece of monolithic art that had decided to grace them with its presence. The driver, a man built like a bank vault in a tuxedo, opened the rear passenger door. A single, impeccably polished black leather shoe emerged, followed by the razor-sharp crease of a custom Tom Ford trouser leg. Adrian Vance unfolded himself from the car. At 38, he was a man carved from ambition and sorrow. His face, which had graced the cover of Forbes and Fortune, was even more arresting in person. All sharp angles and intense, storm-gray eyes that missed nothing. He had not been seen at a public event in 3 years, not since the scandalous collapse of his engagement to Chloe Sterling. His presence alone was an earthquake. Phones, previously tucked away in designer clutches and jacket pockets, emerged as one. 100 tiny glass eyes, all desperate to capture the ghost of Bel Air. Chloe, the evening's host, stood near the entrance, a vision in crimson silk. A triumphant smile was plastered on her face. She had lured the great white whale from the depths. His appearance at her charity gala was a coup that would cement her place at the apex of the social food chain. She started to glide towards him, her smile widening. But then, the other door opened. The crowd held its collective breath. Who would it be? A supermodel? A European princess? The speculation was a silent, crackling energy in the air. What emerged was not what anyone expected. First, a hand, delicate and steady. Then, a figure that seemed to be woven from starlight and history. It was a woman, and she was wearing a gown of pure, hand-woven kente cloth. The gold threads in the fabric, traditionally reserved for royalty, caught the evening light and seemed to burn with a soft, inner fire. The dress was a masterful creation, a strapless marvel that flowed into a mermaid silhouette, hugging a figure of quiet strength. Her hair was styled in an elegant braided updo, adorned with subtle gold cuffs. Her face, a beautiful landscape of high cheekbones and a serene mouth, was lit by a gentle, almost shy smile. She was breathtaking, and no one had any idea who she was. Chloe Sterling stopped dead. Her perfectly painted smile didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a splotchy, horrified mask of foundation and disbelief. Her eyes, wide with a dawning, frantic rage, darted from the woman to Adrian and back again. "No," she mouthed, the word a tiny, unheard puff of air. Adrian didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Chloe. He only had eyes for the woman in gold. He extended his hand. She took it, her slender fingers fitting perfectly in his. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of such profound and public reverence that a fresh wave of gasps rippled through the onlookers. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, and whispered something. The woman's shy smile blossomed into a laugh, a sound as warm and melodic as the dress she wore. That sound seemed to break Chloe's paralysis. She stalked towards them, her crimson dress a slash of fury against the calm evening. The cameras pivoted, sensing blood in the water. "Adrian," she hissed, her voice tight and venomous. "What is the meaning of this? What is she doing here?" She didn't even look at the woman, dismissing her as a piece of furniture, an irrelevant accessory. Adrian turned to face his ex-fiancée. His expression was one of glacial calm. He looked at Chloe, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. He held the woman's hand a little tighter. "She's with me, Chloe." The words were simple. The impact was seismic. "With you?" Chloe let out a laugh that was sharp and jagged, like breaking glass. "With you? Adrian, have you lost your mind? Do you know who this is? This is the help. This is your maid." The final word was spat out, designed to humiliate, to strip away the kente cloth and the quiet dignity, and leave the woman exposed and shamed. The crowd murmured, the story clicking into place with salacious, ugly speed. The billionaire and his maid, a tawdry affair. But the woman didn't flinch. She simply stood beside Adrian, her back straight, her chin high, her eyes radiating a calm that seemed to unnerve Chloe more than any outburst would have. Adrian looked down at the incredible woman beside him, then back at Chloe. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "You're right," he said softly, his voice carrying in the stunned silence. "She is my maid." He paused, letting the admission hang in the air. Then he continued, his voice ringing with a power that vibrated in everyone's chest. "She cleaned my house, and in doing so, she cleaned my life. She showed me what it was to have a home. She showed me what it was to have a heart." He turned away from Chloe, his back a final, definitive dismissal. He faced the woman he had brought, this woman the world saw as a nobody. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears, not of shame, but of overwhelming love. And then, Adrian Vance, the $5.3 billion man, the recluse, the icon, did something that no one in that crowd, in their wildest, most fevered dreams, could have predicted. On the plush red carpet, under the glare of 100 flashing cameras, surrounded by the richest and most powerful people in the city, he slowly, deliberately, got down on one knee. The world stopped. Chloe Sterling made a small, strangled sound in the back of her throat, her hands flying to her face. And then, as Adrian Vance presented a simple, perfect diamond ring to the woman the world knew as his maid, Chloe's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed in a heap of crimson silk. If you love stories where true character shines brighter than any diamond, and where the proud and arrogant get exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all your notifications, because the way this billionaire honors this humble woman is going to restore your faith in everything. The world saw a maid, but he was about to show them a queen. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 3 years before the gala, before the kente cloth and the fainting spell, there was only silence. The silence of a life scrubbed clean of joy. Adrian Vance, then 35, was not a recluse. He was a ruin. A week before he was due to marry Chloe Sterling, he had been in his home office, reviewing the final details of a prenup his lawyers insisted upon. Chloe had been in the adjoining dressing room, speaking to her maid of honor on speakerphone. She thought he was out. He was not. And he heard everything. "The whale is officially landed," Chloe had trilled, her voice dripping with a victorious glee that turned his blood to ice. "Can you believe it? Another week, and I'm Mrs. Vance. The prenup is a bit of a nightmare, but he's so besotted he'll sign anything I put in front of him. God, he's so boring, Mel. All he wants to do is stay in and watch documentaries. But the jet helps, and the yacht, and the black card. Her friend had giggled. What about that artist you were seeing? Chloe had laughed, a low, conspiratorial sound. Oh, Marco? He's my little stress reliever. Adrian's too busy managing his empire to notice a thing. It's perfect. Adrian hadn't moved. He had just sat there, in his $1,000 chair, as the architecture of his life was dismantled, brick by ugly brick. The betrayal wasn't just the cheating. It was the mockery, the calculated, cold-blooded nature of it all. He wasn't a person to her. He was a transaction, a whale. The wedding was called off the next day via a curt email from his lawyers. The story exploded. Headlines screamed. Pundits speculated. Adrian said nothing. He retreated into his newly purchased mansion in Bel Air, a 25,000 square foot testament to modernist architecture, and pulled up the drawbridge. He fired his entire household staff, convinced one of them had leaked the details of the breakup to the tabloids for a payday. The mansion, meant to be a home for his new family, became his fortress and his prison. For 3 years, he lived in a state of suspended animation. He ran his global tech empire from a vast, sterile office that overlooked a city he never visited. Staff came and went, hired through an agency that specialized in clients who demanded absolute, ghost-like discretion. None of them lasted. They were unnerved by the silence, by the coldness of the house, by the palpable aura of unhappiness that clung to the marble walls like a persistent chill. The house had no soul, because its owner had lost his. Far from the cold hills of Bel Air, in a small, bustling apartment in Koreatown, another life was being lived, one defined not by emptiness, but by overwhelming purpose. Imani Ado, 32 years old, was a woman woven from resilience. She had come to America from Accra, Ghana, 5 years earlier with a degree in textile design and a heart full of hope. But hope didn't pay the bills. Her degree was from a foreign university, and her visa status made finding a professional job impossible. So she did what she had to do. Her life was a triptych of relentless work. From 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, she cleaned houses for the wealthy, moving through their opulent, impersonal spaces like a shadow. From 5 in the evening until midnight, she worked as a dishwasher in a frantic, noisy restaurant kitchen, her hands perpetually raw. On weekends, she bent over her sewing machine, her true passion, creating beautiful, traditional Ghanaian garments for weddings and special occasions in her community. Every dollar, every single cent was accounted for. Every penny was a soldier in the war she was waging. The war was to save her mother's life. Her mother, Amma, lived in a small house just outside Accra. She was the anchor of Imani's soul, a woman whose wisdom was as rich and deep as the earth she farmed. 6 months ago, Amma had collapsed while tending to her garden. The diagnosis was severe aortic stenosis. She needed a valve replacement, a surgery that was complex and, for them, astronomically expensive. The cost was $50,000, an impossible number. Imani had sold her small plot of family land. She had borrowed from friends. She had worked until her body screamed in protest. After 2 years of this brutal rhythm, she had saved $18,247. It was a fortune to her, and a pittance against the mountain she had to climb. Her phone calls with her mother were her only solace. Amma never complained. She would listen to Imani's tired voice and offer proverbs like cool water. "A single bracelet does not jingle, my daughter," she would say. "You are carrying too much alone." Or, "Patience can cook a stone." Imani would hang up the phone, her heart aching with love and a desperate gnawing fear. She was running out of time. Patience could cook a stone, but it couldn't mend a failing heart valve. It was through her weekend tailoring that she heard of the agency. A client, a wealthy Nigerian woman for whom Imani had made a stunning Ankara gown, had been complaining about her housekeeping service. "They're all so lazy and they gossip," she'd said. "But my friend uses this agency, Silent Partners. They work for all the big people, recluses, celebrities. They pay double, but the maids have to sign an NDA as thick as a book. They have to be ghosts." Ghosts. Imani could be a ghost. For double the pay, she could be invisible. She applied the next day. Her quiet demeanor, her impeccable references, and her palpable lack of interest in celebrity culture got her the job. Her first assignment, the Vance estate. A 3-month contract, replacing a maid who had quit after 2 weeks, citing a profound and unbearable sadness in the house. Imani wasn't afraid of sadness. She lived with it every day. She just needed the paycheck. Imani's first day at the Vance estate felt like stepping onto another planet. The house manager, a severe woman named Ms. Davenport, walked her through the cavernous marble entryway. The sheer scale of it was disorienting. It wasn't a home. It was a museum dedicated to the color beige. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the coffee tables, no clutter of life anywhere. It was a space scrubbed clean of personality. "Your duties are outlined in this binder," Ms. Davenport said, handing Imani a tablet. "The cleaning schedule is precise. The approved cleaning products are inventoried daily. You will confine yourself to the areas of the house you are assigned. You are not to deviate." She paused, her eyes cold and sharp. "And the most important rule, Mr. Vance. He works from home. He values his privacy above all else. You may, on occasion, cross his path. If you do, you do not make eye contact. You do not speak. You do not acknowledge his presence. You are to become part of the furniture. You are, for all intents and purposes, invisible. Do you understand?" Imani nodded, her voice quiet. "Yes, Ms. Davenport." "Good," the manager said, already turning away, her heels clicking in imperious rhythm on the marble floor. "Your uniform is in locker 27. Your shift ends at 4. The staff kitchen is in the West Wing basement." Imani spent the day in a state of quiet awe and deep melancholy. She dusted shelves that held nothing but strategically placed, meaningless sculptures. She vacuumed vast, plush rugs that were never walked on. She polished glass tables that reflected only the empty rooms they occupied. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air filtration system. It was the loneliest place she had ever been. She thought of her tiny apartment, overflowing with vibrant fabrics, the constant scent of spices in the air, the sound of her neighbors arguing and laughing through the thin walls. That felt more like a home than this palace of solitude. Her assigned area was the ground floor, which included the library, a grand dining room, and a series of living areas no one lived in. She worked with the meticulous care that was ingrained in her character. She wasn't just cleaning a surface, she was tending to it. It was the same way she handled a delicate piece of silk or measured spices for a pot of jollof rice. It was a matter of respect. At 3:30, her tasks for the day complete, she made her way to the staff kitchen in the basement. It was as sterile as the rest of the house, all stainless steel and fluorescent lights. She was alone. She took out the small container she had packed that morning. Inside was a humble portion of wache, a traditional Ghanaian dish of rice and beans cooked with sorghum leaves, served with a simple tomato stew and a piece of fried fish. It was her comfort, a taste of home in this cold, foreign place. She sat at a small steel table, unwrapped her food, and the aroma filled the small kitchen. It was a scent rich with history and home, of ginger, garlic, and chili, warm and inviting. She bowed her head for a moment, saying a silent prayer of thanks, then began to eat, her eyes closing briefly as she savored the familiar taste. Upstairs, in his cavernous home office, Adrian Vance was staring at a wall of monitors displaying stock market data. The numbers blurred together. He was restless, agitated by a silence that felt louder than any noise. He hadn't eaten all day. His private chef had left a tray of perfectly arranged, nutritionally balanced food outside his door hours ago. It sat there, untouched and cold. He stood up, pacing the vast room. He needed something. He didn't know what. He left his office and walked through the silent corridors of his own home. He rarely ventured into the service wing, but an unfamiliar scent was pulling him. A faint, intriguing aroma that was utterly alien to his scent-controlled environment. It was warm, spicy, and real. It smelled like food someone had actually cooked, not food that had been plated. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, guided him down a staircase he rarely used, leading towards the basement. The smell grew stronger. He found himself standing in the doorway of the staff kitchen, a place he hadn't set foot in since he bought the house. And he saw her, the new maid. He'd seen her name, Imani Addo, on the agency report. He had glimpsed her that morning from a security monitor, a fleeting shadow in a gray uniform. But seeing her now was different. She was sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights, her back straight, eating from a small plastic container, the source of the incredible smell. Her uniform was simple, but she wore it with an unconscious dignity. Her face, in repose, was weary but serene. As he watched, she took out a small, worn photograph from her pocket. It was a picture of an older woman with a radiant smile. She looked at the photo for a long moment, a soft, sad smile gracing her own lips, before tucking it carefully away. She hadn't seen him. He was standing in the shadows of the doorway, a ghost in his own house. He should have left. He should have retreated to his sterile office and his cold meal. But he couldn't. He just stood there, watching this stranger eat her simple, fragrant dinner. He watched as she finished, meticulously cleaned her container, and wiped down the table, leaving the space even cleaner than she had found it. In that moment, watching this quiet woman in her plain uniform, Adrian Vance felt something shift inside him. A tiny, hairline crack in the glacier of cynicism that had encased his heart for 3 years. For the first time since he had bought it, his house smelled like a home, and it had nothing to do with him. The sight of Imani in the kitchen became a strange, secret anchor in Adrian's empty days. He found himself altering his routines, manufacturing reasons to be in the parts of the house where she was scheduled to be. He told himself it was about security, about observing the new staff member. It was a lie, and he knew it. He would forget a tablet in the library just as she was due to begin dusting, and he'd watch from the security feed on his phone as she picked it up, her touch gentle, and placed it neatly on his desk. He would walk to the gallery on the west side of the house, a room he hadn't entered in years, just to catch a glimpse of her carefully polishing the frames of abstract paintings he hated. He never spoke to her. He upheld the wall of silence his own rule had created. But he observed. He was a man who had built an empire on recognizing patterns in data, and he began to see the patterns of her character. He saw the profound lack of artifice. She never cut corners, even in rooms she could be certain no one would enter for months. He saw her kindness. One afternoon, he watched as she found a small, struggling spider near a window. The previous maid would have crushed it or screamed. Imani gently coaxed it onto a piece of paper and released it outside in a patch of sunlight. The act was so small, so insignificant, yet it struck him with the force of a revelation. In his world, people crushed things for convenience. They crushed spirits, they crushed loyalties, they crushed hearts. This woman, who had nothing, showed mercy to a spider. He started leaving things for her, small, anonymous gestures. He noticed she drank only tap water. The next day, a case of expensive artesian water appeared in the staff kitchen refrigerator. Miss Davenport announced it was a new staff wellness initiative, but Adrian made sure the brand was one he'd seen advertised for its mineral content, good for fatigue. He saw through the window that she spent her brief 15-minute break sitting on a hard concrete step in the service courtyard. The following morning, a comfortable, cushioned bench appeared in that exact spot, ostensibly for the gardeners. His most loyal and long-suffering employee, David Chen, noticed the changes. David was officially the head of Adrian's personal security, but his real job was a mix of confidant, fixer, and bullshit detector. He had been with Adrian for a decade, since before the billions. He was a short, immaculately dressed man with a mind like a steel trap and a perpetually unimpressed expression. A wellness initiative? Cushioned benches for the gardeners? David said, standing in Adrian's office, a tablet in his hand. You do know the gardeners have their own break room with armchairs, right, Adrian? Adrian didn't look up from his screen. Morale is important, David. David sighed, a sound of profound and practiced patience. Right. And the sudden interest in the live security feed from the ground floor library every Tuesday and Thursday between 10 and 11 a.m.? Is that also for morale? Adrian's fingers froze on his keyboard. He looked up, his gray eyes meeting David's knowing gaze. I'm monitoring for internal security threats. The only threat in that library is dust, and the new Maid seems to be defeating it quite effectively, David said dryly. Her name is Imani Otto, 32, from Ghana, overqualified and underpaid. Works 2 other jobs, clean record, no social media presence, sends over 80% of her income to an account in Accra. She's either a saint or the most boring spy in history. Adrian felt a flush of annoyance, which was quickly replaced by a deeper curiosity. Why are you running a background check on a cleaner, David? Because you've left this office more in the last 2 weeks than you have in the last 2 years, David retorted. And it always seems to be in the direction of wherever she is. I'm paid to anticipate your moves and your interests. Adrian fell silent. He couldn't deny it. His world, once a vast gray ocean of data and solitude, now had a single fixed point of light. And it was this quiet woman who hummed Ghanaian folk songs while she worked. His secret ritual became the evenings. Imani's shift ended at 4, but she often stayed an extra hour, using the staff kitchen to have her meal before heading to her second job. During this time, she would go to the courtyard, to her bench, to call her mother. Adrian's office had a balcony that overlooked that very courtyard. He would stand there, in the fading light, hidden by the shadows, and he would listen. He didn't understand a word of the language she spoke, which David had informed him was Twi, but he didn't need to. He could understand the language of her voice. He could hear the music of it, the gentle rise and fall of her questions, the soft laughter, the notes of worry that crept in, and the determined reassurance that always followed. It was a conversation steeped in a love so profound and unconditional, it felt like a physical warmth rising up from the courtyard. He would compare it to the phone calls he had overheard from Chloe, calls filled with gossip, transactional compliments, and brittle laughter. Chloe's calls were noise. Imani's calls were music. One evening, he watched as she looked at the worn photo of her mother while she talked. He saw a single tear trace a path down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but her voice, when she spoke again, was thick with an emotion he could feel in his own chest. He felt an overwhelming, illogical urge to go down there, to ask what was wrong, to fix it. It was an impulse so foreign and so powerful, it startled him. He, who had spent 3 years fixing nothing but code and market positions. He was falling. Not in love, not yet. That was too terrifying a concept. He was falling out of his numbness. And it was all because of a woman who didn't even know his name, who was forbidden from even meeting his eyes. A woman who, in her quiet, unassuming way, was cleaning more than just his house. She was dusting off his soul. The call came on a Tuesday, a gray, overcast morning that matched the perpetual weather inside Adrian's heart. Imani was polishing the grand, unused dining table when her phone buzzed with an international number. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was the hospital in Accra. She rushed to a small alcove, her hands trembling as she answered. The doctor's voice was kind but firm. The tests had come back. Her mother's condition was deteriorating faster than they had anticipated. The valve was failing. They couldn't wait any longer. "We need to schedule the surgery within the next 30 days, Mrs. Otto," the doctor said, his voice crackling over the thousands of miles. "The cost remains the same. We will need the funds transferred before we can proceed." 30 days. The words echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of Imani's mind. 30 days to find more than $30,000. It was impossible. A sheer, insurmountable cliff face. She mumbled her thanks, her throat tight with unshed tears, and ended the call. The rest of the day passed in a blur of numb terror. She cleaned with robotic precision, her mind a maelstrom of desperate calculations. Sell her sewing machine? Take out a predatory loan? There were no good options. There was only the looming, terrifying deadline. That evening, she didn't want to call her mother. She didn't want to lie, and she couldn't bear to tell the truth. But she had to. Missing her daily call would cause Amma more worry than anything else. She went to her bench in the courtyard, the one that had mysteriously appeared, and dialed the number, steeling herself. Up on his balcony, Adrian was waiting. It had become the only part of his day that felt real. He saw her sit down, her shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. When she began to speak, the tone of her voice was so different, so heavy with a raw, barely contained anguish that it sent a jolt of alarm through him. This wasn't the usual gentle melody. This was a lament. He didn't know why, but he did it. He took out his phone, opened the voice recorder app, and held it over the edge of the balcony. He felt like a spy, a voyeur, but a desperate need to understand, to decipher the source of this palpable pain, overrode his shame. He recorded the entire 15-minute conversation. When she was done, he watched her sit in the gathering dark for a long time, her head in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. The sight broke something in him. He retreated into his office, the recording burning a hole in his phone's memory. He immediately attached the audio file to an email. The recipient was David Chen. The subject line was one word: urgent. The body of the email was just as brief. Translate this. Every word. I need it by morning. David received the email at 10:47 p.m. while eating takeout noodles and watching a Korean drama. He sighed, placing his chopsticks down. An urgent, late-night request from Adrian involving a cryptic audio file could mean anything from a corporate espionage threat to another one of his boss's eccentric whims. He downloaded the file and listened. It was a woman's voice, speaking in a language he recognized as Twi from his previous research. It was filled with sorrow. David ran the audio through a primary translation software, then sent the file and the rough transcript to a trusted linguistics contractor he kept on retainer for just such occasions, a professor at UCLA. The instructions were the same. Urgent. Need a perfect, nuanced translation by 6 a.m. The next morning, at 7:30 a.m. sharp, David walked into Adrian's office. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but the room was still cold. Adrian was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was just staring out at the city, his face haggard. He hadn't slept. "I have it," David said, holding up his tablet. "Email it to me," Adrian said, his voice flat. "No," David said quietly. "I think you need to hear this one." Adrian turned, his brow furrowed. David pulled up a chair and sat opposite his boss, an act of familiarity few would dare. He took a breath and began to read the translated transcript. He read Imani's words, her voice strained and thin. "Mama, it's me. How are you feeling today?" He read Amma's reply, her voice weak but warm. "I am here, my child. Seeing another day is a blessing. But your voice sounds heavy. What is wrong?" David's voice was steady, a neutral conduit for the torrent of emotion that followed. He read Imani's confession, the words tumbling out in a rush of grief. "The hospital called, Mama. They said we have to do it soon. Within a month." A sob broke through her voice. "And Mama, I don't have the money. I am so far from it. I have worked and I have saved, and it is not enough. I am failing you. I am so sorry. I am failing you." Adrian's hands clenched into fists on his desk. His knuckles were white. David continued, his voice softening as he read Amma's response. "Hush now, my daughter. You listen to me. You are not failing anyone. Do you hear me? You are my treasure, my pride. You have never been a failure. A person's worth is not in their pocket, but in their character. And your character, Imani, is pure gold. Do you remember the proverb I taught you? Obi nima, ose oko oso. He who does not know says he is just passing through. God will not leave us stranded. Do not be afraid." David looked up at Adrian. The last part is just them saying their goodbyes. She tells her mother she loves her more than life. The mother says, "You are my life." Silence filled the room. It was a heavy, ringing silence, thick with the weight of the translated words. Character is pure gold. A person's worth is not in their pocket. The universe knows your journey. The simple, profound wisdom of a woman facing death, comforting her daughter from half a world away. Adrian stared at David, his face a mask of disbelief. He thought of Chloe, of her obsession with status, with the black card, with landing the whale. He thought of his own life, a life so insulated by wealth that he hadn't experienced a single, authentic human emotion in 3 years. He had $5.3 billion in his accounts. He could buy anything he wanted. He could buy companies, islands, the loyalty of politicians. But he couldn't buy a fraction of the character this woman, his maid, possessed. He couldn't buy the love she shared with her mother. He, Adrian Vance, was the poorest man in this house. The realization hit him not like a wave, but like a physical blow. A deep, shuddering breath escaped his lips. He put his face in his hands, his elbows on the cold, hard surface of his multi-thousand-dollar desk. His shoulders began to shake. A sound, raw and unfamiliar, tore itself from his throat. It was a sob. David watched, his own stoic facade cracking with concern. He had never seen his boss cry. He had seen him angry, cold, dismissive, but never this, never broken. Adrian pushed his chair back, stumbling to his feet. He walked to the center of the vast, empty room, a man lost in his own palace. The weight of his empty life, the profound, humbling goodness of Amani's sacrifice, the simple, devastating truth of her mother's words, it all crashed down on him at once. His legs gave out, and Adrian Vance, the titan of tech, the Bel Air recluse, fell to his knees on the cold marble floor and wept. He wept for his lost years, for his hardened heart, for the woman who was suffering under his own roof. He wept because for the first time in a very long time, he felt something real, and it was agony, and it was hope. After the storm passed, a new kind of silence settled in the office. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of purpose. Adrian stood up, his face tear-streaked, but his eyes clear, flinty with a resolve David hadn't seen in years. The ruin was gone. An architect was standing in its place. "I'm going to pay for it," Adrian said, his voice hoarse. "The surgery. All of it." David nodded slowly. "I can arrange an anonymous donation through the foundation. We can have the funds wired to the hospital in Accra within the hour." "No," Adrian said immediately, shaking his head. "You heard her mother. Her character is everything. Her dignity. I can't just hand her a check. That's what people like Chloe would do. It's a transaction. This can't be a transaction." He began to pace, his mind, once a stagnant pool, now a rushing river of ideas. She can't see it as charity. She has to earn it. She has to feel that she did this herself. It has to be her victory, not mine. David raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The old Adrian was back. "And how do you propose she earn $50,000 in less than a month without it being a thinly veiled handout?" Adrian stopped pacing, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first real smile David had seen on him in 3 years. "David," he said, "you know my background check said she was overqualified. What was her degree in?" David consulted his tablet. "Textile design, from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Top of her class." Adrian's smile widened. "Perfect. David, we are going to host a party." David stared at him. "A party? Sir, you consider having me in your office to be a party. You haven't entertained since Chloe," Adrian finished for him. "And it's time that changed. We're hosting a charity gala, here, at the estate, in 28 days. David looked as if Adrian had just suggested they build a rocket to the moon. 28 days? To plan a gala for the kind of people you invite? It's impossible. The logistics, the catering, the security, you can handle it," Adrian said with unshakable confidence. "And I'll handle the theme. The theme will be a celebration of African excellence. We'll showcase art, music, and fashion from across the continent. And for that, we'll need a designer." The pieces clicked into place in David's mind. He let out a low whistle. "That's elaborate and brilliant and slightly insane." "It's perfect," Adrian corrected. "The event planner you hire, make sure they are incredibly busy, overwhelmed even. I want them to be desperate for a specialist designer for African formal wear. I'll leave their contact information on a notepad on the library desk. Imani is scheduled to clean the library tomorrow morning." The plan was a masterpiece of benevolent deception. The next day, Imani, her heart heavy with the impossible task before her, was dusting the grand desk in the library. A notepad was lying open. A name, Anya Sharma, Lux Events, was scrawled on it, with a phone number and a note. Call urgently. African gala designer needed. Imani stared at it. It felt like a sign from the heavens. Her hands trembled as she took out her phone and snapped a picture of the page. That afternoon, she made the call. Anya Sharma, who had been thoroughly briefed by David, played her part perfectly. "Oh, thank God you called," she exclaimed. "I am in such a bind. I'm planning this massive gala for a very private client, a celebration of African culture, and my lead designer just fell through. I need someone who understands traditional fabrics, kente, Ankara, Adire. I'm looking at your website now. Your work is incredible. This is exactly what I need." Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. "I would be honored to be considered." "Considered? My dear, you might just be my savior," Anya gushed. "The job is extensive. I need custom gowns for the hostesses, unique staff uniforms, and one major showcase piece. It's a huge rush job. The budget for the design contract is $75,000. I can offer a $50,000 advance for materials and to secure your time. Can you start immediately?" Imani sank onto her chair in the staff kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear. $50,000. The number, the exact number that had been a mountain just yesterday, was now being offered to her. For her skill. For her art. Tears began to stream down her face, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief and joy. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "The universe knows your journey." "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I can start right now." That night, she wired the $50,000 to the hospital in Accra. Her hands were steady. Her heart was full. She had done it. She had saved her mother. The next 27 days were a whirlwind. Adrian, citing the disruption of the gala preparations, insisted Imani work exclusively on the design project, her salary as a cleaner still being paid. He had a suite of rooms on the second floor converted into a state-of-the-art design studio for her, filled with the finest fabrics, sewing machines, and dress forms. And he began to break his own rule. He would visit the studio under the guise of checking on the preparations. He'd find her there, surrounded by vibrant bolts of cloth, her face alight with passion, her hands moving with the confident grace of a true artist. He would ask her about the fabrics. She would explain the history of kente cloth, the meaning behind the colors and patterns of Adinkra symbols. He was captivated. They started sharing meals. He would dismiss his private chef and happen to be in the main kitchen when she was taking a break, warming up her own food. "That smells incredible," he'd say. "I'm tired of fancy food. Would you mind sharing?" So they would sit, not in the grand dining room, but at the simple wooden table in the main kitchen. Adrian Vance, a billionaire, eating jollof rice and fried plantain from a regular plate, listening as Imani spoke about her childhood in Ghana, about her mother's garden, about the stories woven into the fabrics she loved. He learned about her, not the data points from a background check, but the texture of her life. He learned her favorite color was the deep indigo of Adire cloth. He learned she hummed when she was concentrating. He learned the names of her nieces and nephews. He was falling in love. Deeply, irrevocably. He asked her to design one final special piece, a showcase gown for a surprise guest of honor. He gave her a single instruction: make it a dress fit for a queen. Imani, thinking of her mother, poured all her love, her gratitude, her very soul into that dress. She chose a rare, vintage kente cloth, woven with threads of actual gold, a fabric of immense cultural and spiritual significance. She worked on it day and night, the gown taking shape under her masterful hands. She had no idea she was weaving the fabric of her own future. The night of the gala arrived. The mansion, once a cold tomb, was alive with light and music and people. Imani, dressed in a simple black dress, was backstage, making final adjustments to the hostess's gowns. Adrian found her there. "Imani," he said, his voice soft. "It's all perfect. Thank you." "It was my honor, Mr. Vance," she said, her eyes shining. "You have no idea what this opportunity has meant to me." "I think I do," he said. He was holding a large garment bag. "There is one more thing. The guest of honor. She can't make it, and I can't let this dress go unseen." He unzipped the bag. Inside was the golden kente gown, shimmering under the lights. "I want you to wear it. Please, be my guest tonight. Not as a designer, not as staff, as my honored guest." Imani stared at the gown, then at him, her mind struggling to comprehend. "Me? But I can't. I am—" "You are the most honorable person I have ever met," he interrupted gently. "Please, Imani." And so, an hour later, Imani emerged, not as the maid, not as the designer, but as the woman in gold. And as she stepped out of that mythic car into the stunned silence of the crowd, she finally understood. The gala, the job, the dress, it was all for her. This brings us back to the red carpet, to the shattered look on Chloe Sterling's face, to the collective gasp of the city's elite. After Adrian got down on one knee, after Chloe had crumpled to the ground in a heap of shame and red silk, he ignored the chaos. He looked only at Imani, whose hand was covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and overflowing with joyous tears. "Imani Otto," he said, his voice thick with emotion but clear for all to hear. "I have lived in a world of numbers, of assets, of value measured in dollars. I had everything, and I had nothing. And then I met you. You showed me that a person's worth is not in their pocket, but in their character. My house was just a building until you made it a home. My heart was just an organ until you taught it how to beat again. I don't want to just offer you my world. I want to live in yours." He held up the ring, a single flawless diamond that seemed to capture all the light in the world. "Will you marry me?" Imani was crying freely now, a beautiful, cleansing flood of emotion. She knelt down in her magnificent gown, right there on the carpet with him, and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Yes, of course, yes." Chloe, revived by smelling salts and a desperate desire not to be upstaged even in her own humiliation, staggered to her feet. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "You can't marry her. She's the help. She's a nobody from nowhere." Adrian stood up, helping his new fiancée to her feet. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He turned to Chloe, his face a mask of cold pity. He leaned in and said something softly to Imani in Twi. She smiled through her tears and nodded. He then looked directly at Chloe, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "My fiancée just reminded me of a proverb her mother taught her," he said, his voice ringing across the now silent lawn. He spoke a few words in Twi, the sounds melodic and strong. "Din, pa, ye, sin, ahonya." He paused, letting the foreign words settle before delivering the devastating translation. "It means a good name is better than riches." Imani has the greatest treasure on earth, Chloe. A good name and a good heart. Something you will never understand. He took Imani's hand. Now, if you'll excuse us, my fiancé and I have a party to attend. He turned his back on his past and walked with his future into the light, leaving Chloe Sterling alone in the darkness, the flashbulbs of the cameras like 1,000 merciless, judging eyes. The aftermath of that night rippled through their lives with the force of destiny. The story of the billionaire's proposal to his former maid became a global sensation, but Adrian and Imani shielded themselves from the storm. They were in their own quiet, joyful world. The first thing they did was fly Imani's mother, Amma, to Los Angeles. Not on a commercial flight, but on Adrian's private jet. Imani wept as she watched her mother, who had never been on an airplane, look out the window at the clouds below, her face filled with childlike wonder. Amma's surgery at a top Beverly Hills hospital was a complete success. During her recovery, she stayed at the Vance estate, and her presence completed its transformation. Her warm laughter echoed in the marble halls. The scent of her cooking, rich, authentic Ghanaian stews and soups, permanently replaced the sterile nothingness. She would sit in the garden, on the very bench Adrian had bought for Imani, and tell him stories of her village, sharing proverbs that Adrian would write down in a leather-bound journal. The house was finally, truly, a home. Adrian and Imani's wedding was not the grand spectacle the world expected. It took place 3 months later in the estate's rose garden, the same one Amma now tended to every morning. There were only 50 guests. David Chin was Adrian's best man. Amma, radiant in a blue lace gown designed by her daughter, walked Imani down the aisle. Imani herself wore a simple, elegant white dress of her own design, but for her veil, she used a piece of the golden kente cloth. As they exchanged vows, Adrian whispered his in a mix of English and the Twi that Imani and Amma had taught him. "I promise to honor your good name," he said, "which is more precious than any riches." Imani did not give up her passion. With Adrian's full backing, she launched her own fashion label. She named it Amma's Grace. It was an instant success, not just because of her story, but because of her immense talent. Her designs, which blended modern silhouettes with traditional African textiles and craftsmanship, were celebrated for their beauty and authenticity. But it wasn't just a business. A significant portion of the profits went directly into a new foundation they established, the Good Name Fund, which provided grants, training, and microloans to female artisans and entrepreneurs in Ghana and across West Africa. Imani, the woman who once scrubbed floors to save one life, was now helping to transform thousands. And Chloe? Her downfall was as swift as it was complete. The video of her collapse and her subsequent shrieking tirade went viral. It was played on talk shows, dissected in gossip columns, and memed into oblivion. She became a caricature of entitled arrogance. The hedge fund manager she had been dating, a man even more obsessed with public image than she was, dropped her via text message the next day. Her fair-weather friends, terrified of being tainted by her social poison, stopped answering her calls. The invitations dried up. She was ostracized, a pariah in the world that had once been her kingdom. A year later, the last of her money gone, her reputation in tatters, Chloe was working as a hostess at a trendy but not top-tier restaurant in West Hollywood. Her face was harder, the cosmetic smile replaced by a permanent, brittle tension. One evening, the maitre d' approached her, his face pale. "Table 12, VIPs. Be nice." Chloe picked up 2 menus and walked towards the secluded booth. And there they were, Adrian Vance and Imani, who was now visibly, beautifully pregnant. They were laughing, holding hands across the table. They looked up as she approached, and a flicker of recognition passed through their eyes. Chloe froze, a hot, suffocating wave of shame washing over her. She expected a smirk from Adrian, a look of triumph from Imani. She braced for the humiliation, but it never came. Adrian just gave a slight, polite nod, and Imani looked at her, and her expression was not one of victory or pity. It was one of genuine, gentle concern. "Chloe," she said softly, "it's good to see you. Are you doing okay?" The simple, honest question, delivered with the same quiet grace Imani showed to everyone, from billionaires to spiders, was the final, devastating blow. It wasn't their wealth that shamed her. It wasn't their happiness. It was Imani's goodness. It was the stark, unassuming